Hello and thanks for joining us for our mid-morning edition of Arirang News. I'm Mark Broom. Let's start by taking a look at the day's headlines. Looking to bridge the bipartisan divide, President Moon Jae-in is overseeing a joint policy consultation body made up of the government and rival political parties. The aim, reaching consensus over divisive economic and North Korea policies. Sparks are expected to fly at South Korea's National Assembly as rival parties prepare to take a fine-tooth comb to the government's record $420 billion budget proposal for 2019. Plus, Iran is bracing for a major blow to its already shaky economy. In the coming hours, the Trump administration will reinstate all U.S. sanctions on Tehran that were lifted under the 2015 nuclear deal. Our starting point this morning, though, a meeting of the Joint Policy Consultative Body with the rival parties and the government at South Korea's presidential office of Cheongwa-dae. It's the first meeting of its kind, and it's bringing together the leadership of the rival political parties and members of the government. The issues up for debate are the domestic economy and the administration's peace drive with North Korea. For more on this, we have our presidential office correspondent Shin Se-min on the line for us. So, Semin, tell us more.
Right, Mark. Today's inaugural meeting is the result of an agreement reached in August this year between the rival political parties and the Moon Jae-in administration to form a joint policy consultation body. So in a little over an hour, party leaders and the government officials will be gathering here at the top office, a meeting that will continue into a working luncheon. President Moon is likely to call for bipartisan support from the rival political parties on issues like turning the sluggish economy around and the ongoing efforts to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula. And also the party leaders, in response, are sure to raise their respective stances, especially now the National Assembly has started the process of reviewing the government's $412 billion budget bill for next year. But, Mark, the takeaway of today's meeting is the joint governance between the ruling and opposition parties and the government, just as the president had initially proposed. But with the parties sharply divided over most things, it still remains to be seen if the respective sides will be able to reach consensus on some of the most pressing issues facing the country. Mark?
Well, thank you very much for that report, Semin, and bring us more updates as you get them in our later newscasts. Now, we are going to stay with domestic politics and the issue of the budget because South Korea's National Assembly's Budget Committee will hold a meeting this morning to deliberate the government's 2019 budget plan. Top government officials will explain the budget in detail, and that will be followed by a questioning session by rival party lawmakers. The government has proposed this record budget of around $420 billion. That's up almost 10% on year. The Assembly has until November 30th to review and pass the budget, but it's not expected to be a smooth ride, as we just heard from our Shin Se-min there. While the ruling party is aiming to secure the budget the government is asking for, the opposition is seeking sharp cuts, especially the budget set aside for short-term jobs and inter-Korean projects. So the South Korean government has made job creation its #1 priority amid this prolonged period of stubbornly high unemployment in the country. But the jobs it's creating are unfortunately not that well paid, plus many of them are low-skilled and only of a temporary, not a full-time nature. Choi Si-young reports.
Data from Statistics Korea show that this year only the public sector has had a net increase in what are considered low-paid jobs, where workers earn less than $1,800 a month, and the increase was the biggest since that figure was first compiled 5 years ago. In the first half of the year, the total number of these low-income workers in the public sector was about 400,000, up nearly 50,000 from a year earlier. Other industries, including the manufacturing, construction, retail, and lodging sectors, also declined in low-paid jobs. For example, this year, the manufacturing industry, which hired the largest number of new employees, saw a nearly 230,000 on-year decrease in jobs that are low-paid. Meanwhile, the number of workers earning more than the $1,800 threshold increased in both the public and private sectors. Overall, the sudden increase in low-paid jobs in the public sector helped keep the job market from deteriorating further. But many of those new jobs are low-skilled and temporary, fueling criticism that the government isn't considering quality of the jobs it creates. Just 2 weeks ago, the government promised to create nearly 60,000 jobs in the public sector alone within this year. Aside from questioning the plan's feasibility, worries persist among some experts about the quality and sustainability of such work. 최시영, Arirang News.
Now we're going to switch gears somewhat. After weeks of speculation, we now have confirmation. US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has revealed that he will meet this week with North Korea's Kim Yong-chol. He is the closest aide to North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, and this is going to happen in New York sometime in the coming days. Up for discussion, denuclearization and a second summit between Kim Jong-un and US President Donald Trump. Lee Seung-jae with the details.
In an interview with CBS's Face the Nation on Sunday, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo confirmed his meeting with Kim Yong-chol, whom he called North Korea's number 2, will happen sometime this week in New York. Pompeo said he expects the two sides to make some real progress, including an effort to make sure the upcoming second summit between Kim Jong-un and President Trump can take place, where substantial steps toward denuclearization can be achieved. Despite the upcoming meeting, the two sides continue to be at odds over the heavy sanctions on the regime. Last week, North Korea's foreign ministry warned Pyongyang will seriously consider reviving its nuclear weapons program unless U.S. sanctions are lifted. However, Pompeo made it clear on Fox News Sunday that there would be no economic relief until the U.S. had achieved its ultimate objective. Meanwhile, news of the meeting between Pompeo and Kim Yong-chol and the possibility of another summit comes just 2 days before the crucial midterm elections in the U.S., widely seen as a referendum on President Trump. Trump has often pointed to the détente with North Korea as a signature foreign policy accomplishment. Pompeo emphasized in both television appearances that there have been no missile or nuclear tests since the Singapore summit some 5 months ago. Kim Yong-chol, a former top intelligence chief, visited the White House in the run-up to the Singapore summit and has been Pompeo's counterpart in the months since. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
South and North Korea have just started a joint field survey on the peaceful use of river estuaries. The inspection is part of September's comprehensive inter-Korean military agreement, where the two sides agreed to jointly use the Han and Imjin River estuaries along the inter-Korean border region. According to Seoul's defense ministry, the joint inspection team is made up of 10 people from each side, including military and maritime officials and civil waterway experts. The defense ministry says it also plans to complete the field survey of the 70-kilometre-long zone by the end of this year. Once complete, nautical charts on the estuaries will be provided to allow private ships to use the estuaries. The two Koreas have raised yellow flags at 11 guard posts each along their heavily fortified border, a first step towards dismantling the posts under a military agreement reached as part of September's Pyongyang Declaration. Seoul's defense ministry says the two sides placed 4 by 3 meter flags at each of the 22 guard posts on Sunday to mark that the posts are being removed. The ministry added the move is aimed at enabling each side to observe progress in dismantlement work so it can be carried out in a transparent manner. South Korea and the United States have resumed their joint maritime and marine exercises, which had been suspended since May in a bid to ease tensions with North Korea. The two allies' marine forces began joint training earlier on this Monday near the southeastern port city of Pohang. For the next 2 weeks, some 500 troops will conduct the Korea Marine Exercise Program. Seoul and Washington suspended this year's major joint military exercises, including Ulchi Freedom Guardian in the summer and Vigilant 8s that was slated for December. They're expected to decide on the course of next year's large-scale drills before December 1st. Iran is bracing for a second round of US sanctions, which will take effect on Monday US time. They are being described as the most stringent set of punitive measures since Washington withdrew from the 2015 landmark nuclear deal, which was sealed under the previous Obama administration. For more on this and other news from around the world, let's turn to our Noah Adam. So Adam, tell us more.
Well, Mark, the sanctions are mostly aimed at financial and shipping sectors, but the most significant measures prohibit purchases of Iranian oil, which provides roughly 80% of Tehran's tax revenue. All countries and businesses that buy oil from Iran risk secondary sanctions from the United States, and the Trump administration has vowed to pursue offenders aggressively. But 8 countries will be able to continue importing Iranian oil for a limited time at lower levels in order to avoid upsetting global crude markets. Washington has not named those countries, but Turkey has revealed it is one of them, and South Korea, China and Japan are also thought to be on that waiver list. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said they tried to pull all Iranian imports but were unable to do so by Monday's deadline. He added that he would not rule out the Trump administration extending the waivers beyond 6 months. Meanwhile, the sanctions are also aimed at cutting off Iran's banking sector from the global market. However, Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin had said Iran will still be able to maintain limited access to the international financial transaction system, which is more commonly known as SWIFT, but only for humanitarian purposes. Tehran has remained defiant, saying it can deal with the impacts of sanctions, but Iranian citizens are anxious of the country's fluctuating currency and rising prices of goods. Thousands of Iranians gathered in Tehran on Sunday to protest against the sanctions, with the crowd chanting "Death to America." The government-organized rallies coincided with the 39th anniversary of the seizure of the US embassy in Tehran, and they were broadcast live on state TV. Italy continues to suffer from the aftermath of devastating storms, with the death toll now reaching almost 30. 9 members of 2 families died in the same house over the weekend in Sicily. Among them were 2 children aged 1 and 3. 3 other people died when their cars were swept away on the southern island. Days of heavy rain and winds have killed at least 17 other people, mainly in the northern and western parts of Italy. Italian Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte has said he will convene a cabinet meeting this week to announce a state of emergency in affected regions. Voters in the Pacific territory of New Caledonia have rejected a bid for independence from France. Final results showed that 56.4% chose to remain a part of France, while 43.6% voted to leave. The turnout was 81%. The result was tighter than some polls had predicted, which could encourage nationalists to try for a new referendum in the coming years. 2 more referendums on independence can be held before the year 2022. French President Emmanuel Macron described Sunday's result as a historic step that showed great pride for the French Republic. A giant effigy of former UK Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson has been set alight during weekend bonfire night celebrations in England. On November 5th, people across Britain hold fireworks displays to mark the anniversary of Guy Fawkes' failed 1605 plot to blow up the British Parliament. The town of Edenbridge in Kent traditionally burns an effigy of a notorious figure, and decided this year to go with the leading Brexit campaigner. Footage shows the 11-metre statue of Johnson holding a slice of cake with a Union Jack on it. By his feet were red buses, which during the Brexit campaign were used to show the inaccurate claim that the UK sent £350 million to the EU instead of funding the UK's National Health Service. Previous Edenbridge victims include former Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein, as well as US President Donald Trump.
Now, Japan's foreign minister has reportedly said Japan has given South Korea all the compensation it needs for the victims of its wartime atrocities. and forced labor. It's the Korean government, Taro Kono said, that's responsible for reparations to individuals. According to Japanese broadcaster NHK, Kono told the crowd at a street rally over the weekend that Tokyo cannot accept last month's ruling by South Korea's highest court. South Korea's Supreme Court upheld a lower court ruling requiring steelmaker Nippon Steel and Sumitomo Metal Corporation to pay 4 South Korean victims around $87,000 each as compensation for unpaid work. Kono said Tokyo already paid South Korea back in 1965 as a form of economic support, around $500 million, which was more than South Korea's national budget at that time. Now, after hitting a new all-time high in September, South Korea's foreign exchange reserves edged down in October to $402.7 billion. The Bank of Korea says the country's reserves dipped by $250 million a month due to the stronger greenback, which in turn decreased the value of the BOK's assets in other currencies. As of the end of September, South Korea had the world's 8th largest foreign exchange reserves, with China, as usual, topping the list. Civic groups from across the political spectrum here in South Korea are forming dialogue sessions to try and understand all the different views and opinions out there on unification with North Korea. This is all part of President Moon Jae-in's plans to form a consensus, hopefully anyway, on unification policy. Our Oh Jung-hee tells us more.
South Korea's conservatives and liberals are coming together to have open conversations about their different views on North Korea and set the foundations for possible unification. Major civic groups from both sides of the political spectrum, as well as neutrals and religious groups, launched a civilian movement last week to promote a social dialogue on unification. Each session of social dialogue brings almost 100 ordinary citizens and activists together for a frank chat on North Korea and the future of the two Koreas. The ultimate aim of this joint movement by the government and civil society is to come up with a national unification contract, President Moon Jae-in's goal of forming a public consensus on unification in North Korea.
Citizens of South Korea should, of course, be part of formulating unification and North Korea policies. And the public agree that policies should be in accordance with the national consensus, despite changes of administration.
Unification and North Korea policies have most of the time been a source of conflict within South Korea. And though the general public's interest on unification has risen thanks to recent developments, North Korea is still not an easy or casual topic to discuss. This is because of the politically sensitive nature of the topic and also the growing indifference toward North Korea, especially among the younger generation.
I do feel some sort of ethnic connection with North Koreans, but that's it. People around my age don't really think about North Korea, and it's not comfortable talking about it.
It's most crucial to gather various opinions about what unification is, and the government will continue its publicizing process until the end of this administration at least, and come up with a draft consensus that South Koreans can agree to at the minimum extent. It's impossible to come up with a perfect draft that everybody's satisfied with.
It is not clear if this movement will actually lead to any written public agreement on unification, but the process of bringing people in to discuss issues and understand various viewpoints could be a good first step for the government in formulating consensus-based unification policies. Oh Jung-hee, Arirang News.
Now, doctors here in South Korea have successfully completed the country's first chest transplant using 3D printing technology. It's quite extraordinary. The artificial chest is lighter than conventional materials and was specifically tailored to this patient's chest to improve precision and strength as well. And the surgery went very well. Park Se-young with more.
This patient had a sarcoma in his sternum and ribs, which needed to be removed. A medical team in Korea turned to 3D printing, and for the first time in Korea, the team successfully transplanted a 3D printed rib cage into a patient. The world's largest customized artificial bone structure, replacing the patient's sternum and 10 ribs, was composed of pure titanium.
The 3D titanium implants are tailored to the patient's body to minimize pain and complications after surgery while maintaining motor skills and strength.
Half a month after surgery, the patient said he does not feel any discomfort in his chest. The customized artificial chest was made using independently developed 3D printing technology. Titanium powder was melted and connected like a spider's web to give the material more strength and enough elasticity to withstand chest compression.
It required a lightweight structural design to reduce weight and to also be strong enough, it needed a special structure. And because the patient needs to breathe, we applied the structure for elasticity as well.
This transplant is the first such procedure in Korea and the sixth successful procedure in the world. Park Se-young, Arirang News.
Researchers in South Korea have discovered a bacteria that can protect tomatoes from a deadly infection that has no cure to this day. The next mission is to figure out how the bacteria's disease-fending system actually works. Our Jo Sang-min with this report.
The tomato business in South Korea is thriving. Data show the nation produces more than 350,000 tons of love apples a year. Despite those big yields, though, experts say tomatoes are one of the most heavily damaged kinds of produce when farms are hit by bacterial wilt. When infected with bacterial wilt, the plant's leaves and water transport system damaged immediately, and then the disease spreads down to the roots in the soil.
When a plant is infected with bacterial wilt, there is simply no way to save it. The disease spreads rapidly once it makes contact and eventually dries up and wilts the plant.
Until now, the only way to minimize the damage was to plant one of the few tomato varieties that are slightly more resistant. But there is hope. Local researchers have recently discovered a bacteria that keeps the disease away. Interestingly enough, this particular microbe, in almost all cases, is found in soil near the roots of tomato plants.
Traditionally, the focus was on a plant's natural ability to protect itself from such diseases. But this discovery opens a new way of thinking. Now we feel a need to look at what's in the soil and how the surrounding conditions affect a plant's ability to fend off infections.
Scientists say their next mission is to find out how the bacteria protects the plant and ultimately find ways to use that mechanism to develop a pesticide that protects all plants from the deadly infection. Jo Sang-min, Arirang News.
Good morning. Ultrafine dust will blow across the west of the country, leading to poor air quality. But Gangwon-do province will have normal air. In fact, dry weather in Gangwon-do province will intensify with a dry weather advisory in place, so be sure to enjoy the sound of crunching leaves today. And temperature-wise, there's not much to complain about, but beware of wide temperature differences as single-digit morning lows will jump to the upper teens or 20s across the nation. In Korea, we'll have mostly sunny skies, but Beijing will be dustier, while Tokyo will have good to normal air. As for Korea's daily highs, Seoul will get up to 18 degrees Celsius. Daejeon and Chuncheon will hit 17 degrees this afternoon. Unseasonably warm daily highs will return to the season north by midweek, but despite rain on Thursday in Ipdong, which is the traditional start of winter on Wednesday, temperatures will be bearable for another week or so. That's Korea for you, and here's international weather for viewers around the world.
Well, that's all we have for now on this Monday morning here in Seoul. Do stay tuned to Arirang TV. Plenty more coming up, plus our next newscast at noon Korea time with our very own Lee Ji-yoon. So until then, goodbye.
'18 Overseas TV Audience